Welcome back to week 2 of Grief and the Architecture of Belonging. Today, we are continuing our talk on self. Last week, we talked about the grief that we can identify, the loss of a loved one, or something that is a little bit more identifiable in our culture. But today, we're talking about grief in ways that we don't talk about. And so I'm Annie Emprima. I'm a metaphysical trauma researcher. I look at the mind and the body from that third attribute of self, of mind, body, soul, and how there are invisible aspects of our healing and invisible aspects of our sense of belonging that are not measurable with diagnostic tools. And so I spend a lot of time looking at conversations from a different angle of observation. And today I have my beautiful co-host, Suzanne Jabour. And Suzanne, if you want to give us a little bit a background of your work.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm a grief educator and coach. I'm in Vancouver, Canada, and I really come to this work from my own losses and what I needed to learn in order to survive myself, particularly when my son died just over 5 years ago. And I love, Annie, how you were describing your curiosity. Like what you're really excited about is looking at these very normal life things from a different perspective. And that's how I feel about the work that I do around grief. It's looking at it as really a normal and natural response to losses of all kinds, and nothing that we're supposed to be scared or intimidated by. But that happens because at these levels of belonging, in our grief illiterate and phobic society, we don't get to connect when grief happens to us. And in your space, when trauma happens to us, that's something that's supposed to be quiet and hidden, and we're supposed to just have this great outward facade. And for me, when my son died, that became no longer possible. So I had to really learn, and that's why I love our topic we're talking about today, about that sort of sense of, all the for me, it's often secondary losses on top of the loss of your loved one. And for me, a huge one was that sense of identity. And sort of how does the loss of a loved one, which is a very normal thing we think of, impact us on that identity level? And then once I saw that, I couldn't unsee all the other ways that our identity shifts throughout our lifetime, and how that impacts our sense of belonging, both to sort of the community at large and to ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah. And I like how you pointed out that we don't really embrace grief as an emotion.
Yeah, it's something that we kind of hold at bay, that we kind of, as a collective, those of us that are living it are in the weeds, but as a collective, we're kind of pretending it's not going to happen to us, which is so bizarre because it's, the only guarantee, really.
Yeah.
You're going to have some grief in your lifetime.
It is inevitable, indeed.
Yeah.
So we've been doing breathing exercises. Do you mind leading the breathing exercise for us?
Yeah, absolutely. I love the exercise that we're going to do today, because the other thing I see so clearly about Western culture, particularly in North America, is we're so great at understanding ourselves from the neck up. We're so in our heads, we're so sort of intellectual and theoretical about things, and we forget that actually we need to be grounded in our body. That's the place where the magic happens. So the exercise that we're going to do today is one where we're really connecting deeply with our body. We're going to put one hand on our heart and one hand on our belly. And why we do that is so that we're reminding our body that it's safe. And I was thinking when I was planning for how to introduce this exercise, I was thinking about sort of the wise one wisdom. And if you think back to sort of my parents for sure, and their parents 100% for sure, would say, well, follow your heart. Like, what does your gut tell you? And we've kind of lost that wisdom somehow. So this is another exercise that helps us ground really into our body and into that heart gut wisdom, where we know there are neurons, we know there is intelligence and wisdom and all kinds of knowledge that we forget to connect to. So as we slow our breathing, I'll invite you, whatever's comfortable for you, either close your eyes or soften your gaze. And we're going to take a series of 3 like long, slow breaths. And what I want you to envision is that as you breathe in, you're inhaling into those hands. And as you exhale, you're allowing your body to catch you. So you're going to inhale into your hands, into your heart, into your belly for a 4 count, and a slow exhale. And just as that breath leaves your body, allow those hands, allow your body to catch you. 2 more. Inhale and exhale, and let your body catch you. Remember your safety. And 1 more. Slow inhale. 2, 3, 4. And exhale. And just allow your body to catch you, to hold all that's going on, and to remember that in this moment, you are safe. And when you're ready, just open your eyes and reconnect with the room. I love that. I love every way we can reconnect with our body because I am 100% a head person in recovery, right? Really wanting to deepen that connection. But I 100% was socialized as a head person. That was my role in the family. That was how I operated in the world. So all of those ways we can reconnect to our body that has so much wisdom, especially in grief and trauma, so much to offer us. That's really where it all is. We're trying to head our way out of it and we can't. And so I just want to encourage everyone, as you're watching, those with us in the room, thank you so much for coming. You can pop your questions in the chat. We'll be watching. If you're watching the recording, put them into the comments. We'll be watching for those too. And again, today we're talking about that grief and loss at the sense of identity. So Annie, I'd love for you to sort of open up that space for us and talk about what happened for you. I know one of the big transitions of identity for you was when you came out of deployment from the military. Can you start us off there with a little bit of that story?
Yeah, and that's really the beginning of my story in the work that I'm doing. I came back, I was experiencing a grand spiritual awakening at the same time I had PTSD. So my world was already spinning quite a bit. I was on that amusement park ride. What is that called?
Mm,
You go faster and faster.
mm-hmm.
And I came back thinking, okay, when I get home, I'll deal with it. Because that's the military motto when you're deployed. Like, you take care of it when you get home. You'll deal with it when you get home. Suck it up until you get home. And then I came home to another storm. And so it was this, everything was falling apart. It was crumbling in my hands. My business, I was self-employed. I came home from deployment. I had PTSD. I couldn't hold on to my business. I couldn't concentrate for 6 minutes. So all of this grief hit really quickly. The grief of feeling betrayed during my deployment by my leadership, the grief of promises that were broken, all of these things. And then I come home to a dissociated family that tried to cope while I was gone. And it was like, okay, there's no one to catch me. That came with a grief. And, I'm trying to hold on and keep holding on to these things. And so my business, letting go of my baby, it just crumbled and there was nothing I could do. And my marriage crumbled and there was nothing I could do. And all of these elements, it was like every major life wheel, major spoke on the life wheel was cracking, and I couldn't.
Mm.
When there's a whole bunch of holes in the dam and you only have so many fingers, and I could not. So everything cracked, it shattered, and it was quite devastating because I'm grieving with the entanglement of other emotions, grief with anger, grief with betrayal, grief with disappointment, grief with resentment. And it was this massive amount of grief that hit. But I had already come into the deployment with grief. I had already come in with multiple miscarriages and a dissociated husband that wasn't co-regulating with me through the grief. So I was grieving in a silo,
Mm.
and that all like just came into my body and it stored in my body. And that's really what led me to understand many different forms of healing, to include like psychedelics, to include the work that I do in the metaphysical arena. I had these massive experiences, and I had to sort of find my way through it, like climb my way out of that hole, out of that dry well, and just be able to experience it. So um, it was really difficult. And then just a short time after, my friend passed away, who was my closest friend, my save a seat for me at any kind
Mm,
of event, cheerleader friend, the one who wasn't afraid to be really loud when she knew
mm,
somebody else in the room was trying to reduce me, she would be even louder, to cheer me on. She passed away shortly after, and then it was this. Okay, now I'm processing fibromyalgia. I'm processing my nervous system just being overwhelmed with grief,
mhm.
and that was it was leaving the military, that sense of identity, not being a wife, not being a business owner. All of these pieces just on their own may not have been so heavy, but collectively they outweighed the boulder. There were some pretty big trauma stones. Um, and, and I learned a lot about grief during that period and how we misunderstand it as an emotion. It's really a powerful way to express. And yet in our society, we don't really know how to hold space for people that are in grief or in the stages of grief. And I don't necessarily agree with the old formula of how people process grief, because I think sometimes we skip steps or we go out of order, or the
Yeah.
phases.
Which is the premise of that model, just if I can for
Yeah,
5 seconds.
yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Kubler-Ross model, because literally the introduction first line is these stages don't happen linear in a linear fashion. Like they're not intended to be linear. They're intended to be, you might recognize some of these things are going to happen to you in some combination at some point during your grief journey. But yes, I'll get off my soapbox now.
No, we need to be on the soapbox.
It's so true.
Soapbox.
Yeah.
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 I learned a lot. And then as I started diving deeper in metaphysical trauma research and looking at how the body stores grief,
Hmm.
working with people, I was noticing patterns of how certain grief, like grief, let's say of an abortion or grief of a lost child, uh, either in utero or in the early stages of development, how those things, they stack up, but they're so small, they don't really, there's no marquee arrow that says this is grief.
Yeah.
And I think that's an important conversation that we need to be having in our society, because we're not talking about the grief of we're going to be talking about grief in the future weeks on the different layers of belonging, to be looking at this from all these 360-degree angles of, wow, I never saw grief from that perspective. Those are the conversations I want to be having, especially those that are in the audience right now or watching on the recording. Feel free to comment in the chat, um, your aha moments of when you realized something was grief, but society didn't really label or frame it in a way that would help us identify it earlier.
Mhm.
So,
To me, that's so key, right? Because those griefs all become disenfranchised.
yeah,
And
yeah,
sometimes we self disenfranchise them. Like it's not
yeah,
only that they're disenfranchised, they're kind of disregarded and ignored and not given any sort of value or permission by the people around us. But we have that expectation that this is not something we should be grieving. Like we should just be okay with it. Like we're just supposed to, pick up and carry on. I think especially there is something about miscarriages and early infant deaths that is a particular one for sure. I remember when I had my miscarriage before my daughter was born, and I had told people right away that we were pregnant and then had a miscarriage. And so when I got pregnant again, I remember telling my dad, going to my parents, obviously, and as one of the first people and saying, "Oh, we're so excited. Like we're pregnant again." And he said to me, "Well, of course you won't tell anybody until you're at wherever, like it's safer." And I said to him, "No, no, no, no. I'm still telling people right away because when I had that miscarriage, people knew. And so there was no expectation. Like there was an expectation that I should be off a little bit. Not really that you should be grieving or having the fullness of the experience, but at least I knew something had happened."
yeah,
And when you don't even, like, our expectation is you're not supposed to even tell anyone you're pregnant until you might not have to tell them you had a miscarriage. That's
yeah.
so messed up because then you have no support system.
Yes,
And I said to him, if I had not told people I was pregnant, then all the women after my miscarriage who came to me and said, "You know what? It's okay. I had one also, or I had two, and I never had children, or I did have children, or whatever their story was," all of those connections would never have happened.
Yep.
Sense of being seen and understood would never have happened. And that's so much of what happens when we have those losses at the identity level, because we don't want to admit to people that something has happened that has really shifted who we are. Because that's
And
a huge threat to every relationship that you have. And so it's a really hard thing to talk about. And in my experience and the work that I do with people, it's almost inevitable. And that to me is the sweet spot, is that transformational piece that's possible because you have been, as you're saying, like every wheel on the spoke is cracked. Like you don't have enough fingers to hold the dam. You can't tape it back together. In Canada, we jokingly say like you can fix anything with duct tape, right? A little duct tape will do
not
it.
enough duct tape in the world.
Guyver that together, right? You can't. It's just all falling apart. And if you aren't in a position to be able to find safe spaces to say, wow, this is grief. Like, for me, someone had died. So people understood, and it was a child. So it was high up that scale of sort of worthy griefs, which is so twisted. But when it's a loss of identity because of the loss of a relationship or the loss of a job or the loss of a home, or you're moving or you've left deployment, like that whole, I'm not a military kid or related to military families. I don't understand that world very much, except to know that really out of necessity, in a weird way, one of the requirements is that you dissociate.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Because if you're going to be able to show up when
It's
the going gets tough, you do have to be somewhat in a dissociated state. And that sense of like, oh, just deal with it when you get home. But then when you get home, life has been lifing and it's all falling apart. And the resources are not abundant to support you, let's be honest, in my country or yours.
Yeah.
There's a whole gap there around those losses. And I think, I was working with a client the other day that was talking about a relationship and that sense of this is a relationship that's still ongoing, that they don't want to sever, but it's not the relationship they want, that they dream of, that they wish was possible.
Yeah.
And if we're going to have peace in the relationship that we have to grieve that relationship that isn't possible.
Yeah.
Because otherwise we're in comparison with our romanticized version and it's never going to hold up. And then we can't have any peace or connection or joy or happiness in the relationship that we do have. So there's so many things going on. And, I often talk with clients and with groups about that tangle. And that's what you were expressing, right? That tangle, there's so many griefs. They're all in a knot, like the cat got to the yarn and like tangled it all up. And we have to tease that apart.
Yeah.
Because the interesting thing to remember too, just thinking about your situation and so many people's situations where the grief is layered and secondary, and there's this other one, and then someone else dies, and then you've got that and all of its secondary losses. We can only grieve one thing at a time.
Yes, yes, yes.
If you can't tease that ball apart and go, oh, okay, why am I having this big emotion? What was the activator? If you can slow down enough to figure out that and then work your way back to who might that be about? What loss might that be about? So then you can actually be grieving like the right one or the impacted one. And that's a whole skill set that we don't even talk about, let alone cultivate and have at our fingertips, right?
I want to go back to that. We can grieve one thing at a time.
Mm-hmm.
When I came back from deployment, I had physical injuries, like physical pain. And they would ask, where are you hurting? And all I could say is my right knee, because that was the loudest I had.
Yeah.
As I healed my right knee, my left knee hurt. And they're like, well, you never said anything about your left knee. So my left knee could not be heard over the screaming of my right knee. And
Yes.
we don't realize that grief has that too. Like the most heart hurting is going to be the loudest.
Yeah.
Or felt the hardest. But that doesn't mean it's not an iceberg. And I think we do a disservice to many individuals of picking one and saying, okay, we're going to frame this.
Mm-hmm.
This is your only identity of grief. What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, yes, 100%.
Yes.
And I think what's interesting and what comes to mind for me too is when we don't allow ourselves to sort of expand our acceptance of grief, our understanding of it, our labeling of things as grief, we're not only missing out on the ability to understand what they are and then have a framework for how we want to navigate it, but we're also missing opportunities for connection. We're missing opportunities to really talk about grief and learn about it and build these skills that we don't have when the rupture isn't catastrophic.
Yeah.
Because if you are not comfortable talking about grief, if you don't really understand it, if it makes you want to run and hide, but you say something, some kind of platitude pops out, and then you hope that's okay. Like showing up for someone like me who's a grieving mother, grieving out loud, it's going to be incredibly uncomfortable and painful and awkward for both of us. But if we can practice our grief skill set, our showing up for each other skill set, our connecting in the chaos and the messy skill set, because that's all it is. This is a skill set we have not, as a collective, robustly developed. That's those,
Not a class in school.
right? No, we're not teaching this, intentionally as a group learning that this is this way of being we might want to explore. But it's so ripe for connection. It's so ripe for understanding. It's so ripe for really being able to connect on that heart to heart level. We talked about that a little bit last week, but that sense of, wow, I'm having really big feelings about what's happening in the world right now, particularly in your country, but it's happening other places too.
Yeah.
You might have some big feelings about that too. What if we just talk about how we're feeling and we release the ideology and the politics and the whatever, because I suspect, regardless of side of the divide, quote unquote, which is language that is intentionally used to keep us that way, by the way. That's a different episode, whole different, series of conversations. But
that will come up later in the series.
Yeah, right. If we can connect on that heart to heart level, then there's a possibility to see our shared humanity. There's a possibility to understand each other. Because this grief experience it's one of the guarantees. We are going to have it. And in fact, we're having it much of the time. But as long as the societal expectations are that it's quiet, private, and fast, we're not going to make any progress.
No. Denial, denial, denial.
Yeah, not just a river in Egypt.
Yeah. So, are you familiar with Tend and Befriend?
No. Tell me more about that.
Back about 25 years ago, Shelley Taylor and her team looked at fight, flight, freeze patterns in individuals. But this was the first time it was coming from the perspective of a female observing women, because men respond very differently to various emotions. Anger, right? We see anger very different. And this is categorically not absolutes. And what they found was that women who are of childbearing years or beyond, so into menopause, they were more likely to choose tend and befriend. You tend your children, you befriend your peers. So it was okay in times of struggle, fight, flight, freeze, emotional wounds of a society, they would scoop everybody in. It might be having a muffin and coffee in the morning. Like CEOs would have women CEOs would meet with other women CEOs to deal with the hardships of their respective companies. This up until that point, and that's in this century, up until that point, they had never really looked at how different demographics process grief, different demographics process freeze situations. And so when hardship comes, there's a particular group of women that are going to come together, let's have these conversations. That's really like you and I are doing this now with those in the audience, the women in the audience, how we are coming together to say, hey, let's have these hard conversations and let's march through them together, even if we have different experiences, even if we have different backgrounds on how to address emotions through the lens of our culture or generation, age. Let's come together and move through this together. And we'll touch on that later when we get into the community layer of belonging. But as individuals, when we recognize that we don't have to do this alone, it gives exhale that we don't have to handle experiencing it and regulating it concurrently. that
Mm.
we have conversations in language to give, to allow it to be mm, a shared experience.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's that shared language I think that we need to develop, because so often I find myself in conversations about grief and I realize, because this is not a normal part of our conversations in English, we don't even really have the right words for so much of it.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
so we end up using words that, if you're a griever, like if you've had these big losses or this big grief experience for whatever loss, because it comes for all of them, then you understand kind of that, yeah, that's not quite the right word, but we get what you mean. But
yeah.
that to me is so indicative of how much we don't talk about it. Like in
Oh,
English, there
yeah.
aren't even the right words. And I'm 100% sure in other languages there must be, right? There's all kinds of much more evolved emotional languages than English.
Greek. The Greeks understand nuance of emotion.
Yeah.
Love has many forms. And that's true. If our language does not account for nuance, there is no nuance.
Yeah. So then we're having to make up, it makes English even more complicated because we're not creating new words. So we're making additional meanings for words we already have, which makes it an even harder language to learn as an additional language learner, right? Like it makes it even more impossible, because this could mean any of this myriad, vast array of things. But it's so interesting to me that that really undermines that this is a systemic, historical, long held, Western English speakers for sure, and I'm sure others, like the words don't exist in our language. So
No.
this is a skill we're having to develop. It's a language and a way of using our language we're having to co-create together.
Yeah.
And that to me is, in a weird and kind of backwards way, it gives us permission to be really messy and imperfect because we're creating something new. And it also, I think, should help us really move out of that shame blame space.
Yeah.
Because if our language doesn't even have the words, there's no way we're supposed to have the skills or the understanding.
No. Yeah. Yeah.
So it's okay. And I say that, when I'm working with supporters or with organizations, I'll say, like, we cannot be in shame and blame. We, as a collective, we don't have the understanding, the language, or the skill set for this. And
Yeah.
that's okay. It's a missing knowledge. It's missing shared experience. We can change that. We can learn that. But if we're in shame and blame because we think we're supposed to be able to do it already, we can't learn anything from there. We can't grow and hold curiosity and really feel love if we're in shame and blame. And what we need most in this area of grief and trauma and belonging, and how those all come together, is growth and curiosity and love.
Mm. In my upcoming book, I talk about trauma stones, that trauma
Mm.
stones carry weight, even though we don't have a measurement scale for them. We don't have, you can't take an x-ray to see the size of the the grief tumor or the grief
Yeah.
the grief kidney stone, um, because it's not something physical. It's energetic, it's emotional, it's metaphysical. But I do find that it helps some people to give weight, even if it's in pounds or if it's in grams or size wise, like it's the size
Mhm.
2 square inches, it's a square meter, to give some kind of a proportion, because then at least it allows people to have a sense of a visual.
Mhm.
My grief feels like it weighs 10 pounds. My grief feels like it's the size of my desk.
Yeah.
My grief feels heavy like a car on my chest.
Yeah.
Like that kind of, to give it some sense of um, weight. Then we can start to see, are we carrying all these little pebbles? Are we carrying, because if anyone's ever tried to put sand into a bag and then carry that sand across a distance, that individual little grain of sand does not weigh a whole hell of a lot of anything. But in accumulation, when it's accumulated,
Mhm.
it can outweigh us.
Yeah.
And do you do anything like that in your with your um
Yeah, it's so interesting. I don't language it that way, but as you were describing it, I have such a clear memory of the early days, that acute phase after Ben died,
Yeah.
feeling like it was like Sisyphus's boulder. It
Yeah.
was like a Sisyphean boulder that I was pushing up this perpetual hill that I couldn't even, it was too big to even carry.
Yeah.
Like I was pushing it because it was like bigger than me. It was this all-encompassing black ball. It was black. I was pushing it like it was this
Give
big,
it a color.
no,
Give it a
it was
color.
kind of almost lava rockish. Like that's how I think of it. That's how it looked in my
Oh,
envisioning.
sense.
This big, like black lava rock, like thing that was lumpy and bumpy and like it didn't even roll smoothly. Like it was just massive, so big I couldn't carry it. But it's so interesting because that to me makes me so curious because that's external.
Yeah.
That's like it's this big thing that I'm holding. I'm literally holding it out there, pushing it away. Huh, isn't that interesting? Right? Like that visual of it not even being me, of it being this thing I have to interact with.
Yeah.
But yeah, I often talk with clients about finding where they feel that heaviness is kind of how I language it. Like where put your hand on where that heaviness is in your body and then let's feel into that. Like what happens if we breathe into there? What happens if we imagine that heaviness like a almost like a mist that
Mm.
it goes from solid to
Reiki.
liquid to ephemeral, right? And we're looking at it from that lens and breathing into it and all those kinds of things. So I do that to kind of be like, okay, but where do you feel it? And I know your work, because it's on that metaphysical level, is seeing all kinds of things that can't even touch, right? That we can't, because it's not something we can intellectually or consciously is a better word, because it's not intellectual, it's conscious. It's not, that's the pieces we're conscious of that we can find. And often it's in the throat, it's in the chest, in the heart. For me, it was all in the heart, often in the belly. Um, it's interesting. For women, that tends to be where it is. Men too. Yeah, I don't work as much with men, but it's very similar.
Yeah. Yeah. Men just hold it differently.
Yeah.
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 And when 6 weeks after my friend died, my cheerleader, I thought I was having cardiac arrest. My chest
Mm,
felt, my heart, my blood pressure was skyrocketed, like in the red zone. And I
yeah.
felt like I didn't, I didn't know what it was at the time. It hadn't been named yet. I just knew that I woke up one day and my heart was racing and I thought I was having cardiac arrest. It felt like my chest wanted to just like whatever's happening inside it was pushing and wanted to
Mm,
break, and there was no room and my ribs couldn't hold it, but my ribs were going to crack if something didn't happen. It was this, like, I couldn't breathe. It wasn't a panic attack. It was just grief of everything. It was heavy and it hurt. It hurt, physically hurt. There was no room in my body for any more grief, and my system was
mm,
a perfect storm. And I was in the emergency room for 4 days, four times over 5 days of just not being able to breathe. I had to dissociate out of my body because being in my body hurt too much.
mhm.
So I was in this like, um, my memories are all from the ceiling.
Yeah.
It's this process of like how deep, how much I was holding on to grief, and because I didn't have a name, and because I didn't have anyone to challenge me on what I was feeling, I just accumulated and accumulated and accumulated until I hit the breaking point. And
Yeah.
it took me um a long time. In the voice in my head, like I've got, for those that have been following me for a while, I'm very spiritually connected, and the voice said, "This is for you to figure out, not for you to keep. You need to
Mm,
research this. You need to learn this. You need to teach this. This is not for you to keep, but this is for you to understand
yeah.
how people are holding grief." And that's really, that was the fuel for my research on grief.
Yeah. Yeah, I love one of our attendees that said, yeah, it's so heavy. And I remember
Yeah,
at the same time as sort of feeling like I'm pushing this, Sisyphean boulder, that it's also like my body is so heavy. Like the
yeah,
whole thing, I
yeah.
couldn't even identify it as being in one place. Like it was like lifting my arms was so, everything was so effortful. Like nothing felt easy. It's all like you're in trying to move in quicksand.
Yeah.
pudding. Well, when it was pudding, it was like a relief because that was so much better than quicksand. But it's that sense of like the physical resistance of moving through space, which
Yes.
normally we just move through the air. It's not that big of a deal. But when those emotions are so activated and your system is so overwhelmed, it does like that weight in the body that, oh, like where I would not have in those early days been able to identify where it was because it was everywhere. Like that same way you're talking about, like it's just everywhere. It has completely taken over all of the systems.
And if we look at it metaphysically, when we look at the for some people, the auric field, the energy field, the toroidal fields, if we look more in the physics side, when we're in heavy grief, it's collapsing in. So it is, and it's like an accordion coming in,
Mhm.
more weight in smaller space. So all of our layers come in, and then now we're carrying more on our shoulders energetically, as well as physically in many ways, because we start accumulating physical symptoms of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So uh, I'm curious if anyone in the audience has any questions or wants to share in the chat any stories that they've experienced, anything that maybe surfaced through our conversation here. And while if anyone's typing, I want to remind anyone watching either live or on the recording that we end each session with some journal prompts and reflection questions. So that'll be coming up in a little bit. So feel free to also add those into our in the comments. Anything you want to share from those questions as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And I just want to really echo what you're saying about, I love that understanding that it's actually happening like at that energetic level. All our fields are compressing. And the other thing that's happening, so that's happening. We're pushing the boulder. Our body weighs at 4,000 pounds, and every system in our body is impacted. Like grief is a full body experience. It's not just an emotional experience. And that's one of the things that we don't talk about enough. So if
No.
you're grieving and your digestion is messed up and you're not sleeping correctly and your muscles are all weak and you keep bumping into things, or you have no strength, or your brain doesn't work, or something's going on with your lungs, like every system in your body is impacted. And that's normal. So don't feel scared about that, which is not to say if you think something is seriously physically wrong with you, you should not go and, seek professional help. I'm not saying that at all. Please do. But just to understand that if things are just a little bit off or you don't feel like yourself, that's 100% how that it works. Yeah, one of our attendees is just saying, struck by the descriptions of the physical pain. Yes, 100%. Yeah, developing a heart condition since your husband died that's stress related. Yeah,
Yes.
totally makes
Yes.
sense to me. Yes, completely makes sense. Yeah,
Mhm.
and learning, and it's something we have to learn firsthand, right? That connection between grief and the body, and how when we're in the swirl of the grief, our body is responding too. Our energy, our body, our nervous system, all the ways, it's all operating together.
And we
And
can't
yes.
isolate grief.
Hmm.
Very often in general metaphysical anatomy books, grief is in the lungs, yes. But what if grief is entangled with anger? Then it could be
Yes.
somewhere else. What if grief is entangled with worry? Then it's probably in the stomach. What if grief? So grief can fall. And I want to have that disclaimer because in certain lanes, people are. It's very binary to this or
Yeah.
this.
That's not
Grief
how
is
grief
not.
works, though, folks. It's
That's not
not
how
how.
grief works.
If
So,
you're here on this call watching this recording, you know that's not how it works.
mhm. Yes. So a heart condition, yes. 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 Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And that's so interesting, Annie, that people, even in that metaphysical space, which we hope is so much sort of more evolved, for lack of a better word, because we've already discussed English's woeful
Yeah. Yeah.
gaps, that we're still having that argument about how no, grief is just this one thing. No, grief is a both and experience. It's a both and. It's grief and something else. It's grief with something else. There is no, silo that is grief. Grief is a big, messy, amorphous blob of goo. So to be arguing that, oh, it's only in the lungs,
It's
sigh.
hard because metaphysics is so hard for people to grasp to begin with, like
Yeah.
this visible space that has equal weight. So I understand why it happens, that we're trying
Yes,
to
absolutely. Yeah.
very simplified ways to make it more digestible and palatable to people who need hard science, because there's also a grief in not being able to communicate. So
Yes. Yeah.
I understand why it happens, but it's still not accurate.
Yeah.
That accuracy is really where we need to be in the uncomfortable space of desiring accuracy in the metaphysical trauma research lane.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that sense too. Someone's put in the chat when you forget to breathe, you end up
Yeah,
holding your breath. Like
yeah,
all
yeah.
it's even those automatic systems are disrupted, right? We've never in our lives before had to think about breathing, but 100% in that acute grief phase, I remember thinking, "Oh, I am I breathing?" Like, okay. And that's why I do so much breathing work in my work with clients and why we've chosen in these sessions to start there because we really do have to remind our bodies how to breathe slowly, how to breathe deeply, right? How to breathe all the way into our diaphragm, how to really expand our lungs when that area of our body, especially for so many of us, feels so constricted and tight and heavy and sore. But that's where we need the expansion to have the oxygen that's then going to fuel our body and our brain, which is busy reprogramming itself. We could talk for hours, but we should probably start to wrap up.
We should. I do want to, I want to add just a little bit more
Yeah.
grief. Sometimes we get into such shock of what something happened, of how it happened, that we freeze.
Yeah.
And then that freeze response gets stuck in our body and it doesn't move forward. So then it takes up more room, which makes it harder for us to breathe. And that's accumulating the weight. And that's why we hear frequently of people who go to yoga and they're doing yoga and then they just have this emotional breakdown in the middle of yoga because
Yeah.
the movement helped uh, defrost some of that frozen response.
Mhm.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Another comment. And now I have a better chance to process it. Yes. Walk through it and feel sad knowing um, that your parents didn't have that. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And I hear that so often from clients, right? That they learned their way of dealing with grief and loss from their parents who didn't deal with it at all. So there's no, we're inheriting the grief and trauma, but we're not inheriting a skill set to deal with it. So it is that. And then we have that sadness that's so brilliantly stated that they didn't get to do it.
Yeah.
Right. So they ended up carrying it. And I see that in my lineage as well, for sure. Yeah. So interesting.
So I want to thank everyone for coming today. And I invite you to be here next week, same time. We will continue this for 8. This is session number 2 for a total of 8 in the series. We'll be placing the recording on social media, on YouTube and LinkedIn. So if you're on my YouTube subscription, you will get notified. If you are following both of us on LinkedIn, you will get notified. And I want to thank you all for being here. I do ask that if you're in the audience now, please stay. We'll stay behind for a couple more minutes to answer questions. But Suzanne, if you want to close us out, if you could.
Yeah. And we'd love to see you back next week. Next week, we move out one layer from self to the household. So we're going to look at all of that next layer of people and stuff and all of that. And so here's your reflection question for this week. I'm going to read it because I didn't memorize it. If you set aside who you were supposed to be, what version of yourself do you quietly miss? What part of you did you lose along the way? So we'll leave you to think about that and invite you to join us again next week.
Thank you, everyone.